I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at God Derby, here with Emilie Levienaise-Farrouch, who is the composer on the acclaimed period drama Living, which is adapted from the script from Kurosawa's 1952 film Ikura. Emilie, first of all, I was so taken with the first frame of the film. As the film opens, we're immediately immersed in this gorgeous 1950s period. And the score is really uplifting, and it's I think it takes center stage. I'm just wondering, what were the primary inspirations for this beautiful 1950s retro aesthetic that we see, but also that we hear when the film opens?
So the opening piece is, sadly, although it's extremely flattering, it's not one of mine. It's by Dvorak, so it's a classical piece. I'd love to have written this, but I didn't. So in terms of that piece, I don't really know what was the thinking process in terms of selecting this specific classical composition, but in the wider approach of period in the music, in a sense, it was finding a balance between a sound that wouldn't be out of place at the time, but never completely going for a period drama sound. We kind of wanted to create something that was quite unique to the film with Oliver. So we had those early conversations, and a lot of the musical references we were looking for the score wasn't necessarily of the time period. We were looking at things like Steve Reich or Meredith Monk in the terms of the using of voices and things like that, because, you know, in the film, there is a really lovely use of jazz music and songs from the time period. So we didn't think the score also needed to do that the score could really focus on the psychology of the character rather than setting the time.
Yeah, and that classical piece, which is well known, I think what I meant was I felt like it set the tone for what you were trying to achieve, although a lot of what you've brought to the score, has a foundation in the piano, which I want to talk about in a minute. It's very it's very consistent with a lot of the work you've done in the past.
Yeah.
And some beautiful choral work as well. But I felt like it really set the tone, and I always find it really interesting when composers and music directors decide to go to something that is a bit more, something that's more recognizable, but yet it seems to really fuse well with the whole piece or the whole work that you've created for the film. And I'm curious as well, what is that like when you have to try to, I don't know, mix your own original score with previously produced pieces? Is that something that's quite challenging to do, or do you just find that it just kind of adds to or elevates the work generally?
In a sense, they all belong to the sound world of the film. It's probably not a very good technical explanation of what I'm trying to say, but when I approach each film, I'm going to try to create the music that works best for that story. I'm sure a little bit of my own sound bleeds into all the projects I do, but my priority is to serve the storytelling. And that's also the priority of the director and the music supervisor. So I think it kind of all ends up organically feeling like a whole, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So because we were exchanging musical ideas and, playlists of songs of classical pieces throughout the whole process, I think quite organically we ended up creating this unified musical world. I think it's just being quite opened throughout the whole process rather than coming with your own ideas and imposing them on the film. It's kind of seeing it like an exchange rather than, a plaything for you.
Yeah, I think that really comes off really beautifully. Let's talk about the piano, because that is the score features some beautiful piano melodies, and it's obviously an instrument that you have a lot of mastery in your background as a musician. What do you most value about the piano, though, as a baseline or foundation for a really cohesive and emotional score?
It's a tricky one because as most pianists, I would have loved to like play the cello or play a string instrument because of the ability you have to create texture and how expressive they can be. But I think the harmonic language you can create with the piano, because it's polyphonic, it's something very special. And in that piano cue, when the time comes, it's, if you take the melody line, it's repetitive, it's quite simple, but the harmonies that come underneath, it just really changes the feeling of those melodic notes. So I think that's one of the subtlety the piano can bring, is how it can, just with one instrument, you can introduce really beautiful and subtle harmonic language. And then also it's the instrument that's the most natural to me, because, you know, I've played it for years. So when it comes to write some moment that has to have a lot of emotional weight, I'm always going to gravitate towards the piano, because it's just, it bypasses the brain in a sense. I can just feel and then play it without having to think about it. It's just goes straight from the heart to the fingers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's in your DNA. But some of the most distinctive tracks on the score, for example, You Have to Speak to Him, utilize these really poignant and often quite haunting choral elements to great effect. Why did you want to also employ vocals to further amplify the emotion of what this man, played by Bill Nighy, is going through?
So the use of voices was something we discussed really early on with Oliver, because, I mean, early in the film, there's a little line of dialogue where they say almost like church. And it kind of started me thinking about how choral singing, whether, you know, religious or not religious, is such an inherent part of community building. And I kind of always felt like this film, you have Bill's characters, but you also have all this world of community that is excluded from, like, is an ability from being part of something larger, of being integrated with the rest of society. So I kind of wanted to find a way to express that idea of community. But then I felt like simplifying the voices sound to kind of the most primal sound was just the way of making it really relatable and not necessarily it just felt like the most organic. And I remember, like, even during the recording session, just telling the singer to just, you know, like, use their abs for the county hall cue to just really make it in the body, rather than, so not using any word, not using any lyrics. And for me, that moment when he's in the mirror is all about his inability to communicate and to connect with his family, with his community. So it felt like having the longing of those delicate voices was a very good kind of mirror to what is longing to obtain, that part of community.
Absolutely. That makes a lot of sense to me. And it brings me to this. The characters in the story come from a time and place where they're expected to be dignified, restrained, buttoned up, stiff upper lip. You know, it's something that we attribute to 1950s London all the time. I found it remarkable that so much of what they were dealing with under the surface feels apparent through your score. I just felt like you were really able to pinpoint that emotion when we were not seeing it on the surface, but we're hearing it and we're feeling it. And there's some really contemplative and melancholy melodies that you're able to elicit from that particular strategy. I'm just wondering if that was, obviously that seems quite intentional from a score, but were there any other strategies that you're employing to really kind of key into that?
I think that's always part of my process. I kind of, again, this idea of bypassing the brain, I kind of always learn the characters. Okay, I need to feel like I can write from their point of view and their inner world. So I always spend a lot of time really emphasizing with them and learning them and knowing them. And on this one, it was really cool because Oliver Hermanus, the director, is a bit like that too. So he had full backstories for every character, like paragraphs and paragraphs of things he had written about them that he could share with me, which kind of really helped me build that. And then I'm just trying to imagine how they feel. And if I felt like that, what music would I write? And it's kind of this trajectory from the character to the music for me.
And finally, what did you most value or take away from your work on this film? It's about some really fundamental ideas about life and family and mortality, and it ends surprisingly on a really beautifully poignant and yet quite sad note. I took a lot away from it myself. I just wonder, as a composer, you're the heart of the emotion of this film. What did you take away from it?
I think it was a beautiful journey in a sense of meeting this point of bittersweetness and acceptance. It's going to sound very like dramatic, but I think my initial feeling were very sad and very, like it's a tragedy, which is a tragedy. But I think doing this film kind of helped me see things from his point of view, because not only he's accepted the fact that he's going to die, but he's also found the value of his own life. And I think this kind of finding the balance between being terrified of dying, but also kind of appreciating what it was is something that I'm glad I got to kind of think about, because it helped me writing a better score, I think, but also kind of being a little bit more relaxed about mortality in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Emilie, thank you so much for your time today. It's a beautiful score. We'll bring you back shortly for our group chat.
Thank you.
All right, that was great. Thank you so much.